Welcome back, everybody. Sorry to interrupt your conversations. I guess I'm not interrupting your conversations. So welcome back now, and we're going to move to our first panel, focusing on some of the key stakeholders in the partnership. A panel that will be chaired by University of Washington President Anna-Marie Cauce, who's a member of the Convocation Planning Committee. Our panelists are on stage, or coming to stage. And you have their bios in your program book. So let me just turn this over to Anna-Marie.
And we've talked a bit about the important nexus between government, industry, and research universities. And so I want to talk a little bit with, all of you have been involved in some of these partnerships. I want to talk a little bit about, what works, what doesn't work. And so let's start off with let me ask you, what's the unique and important relationship between universities, government agencies, and business in the U.S.? And in your experience, what are the characteristics of those partnerships that are most effective that you've seen in your work? And why don't we begin?
Okay, thanks, Anna-Marie. I am sort of wearing two hats.
Can you introduce yourself?
Shall I introduce myself briefly? I'm Celia Merzbacher. I am currently the Director of Strategic and Institutional Planning at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I've been in that position for less than a year, and before that I was with the Semiconductor Research Corporation, where I was VP for Strategic Partnerships. So I will kind of put on both of those hats, the National Laboratory hat and the industry hat, if you will, from the SRC consortium perspective in answering this. I don't come from a university, and frankly, having been in roles where I had meetings and people would come in and say, you should fill in the blank, I'm a little uncomfortable telling universities what they should do. So I'll sort of present things in the sense of what my experience has been. And being at SRC for about 8 years, the characteristics of that partnership that were, I think, essential to its success, and it's been going for almost 35 years, was that industry and university, so the SRC model, just in a nutshell, is industry, the semiconductor industry came together in the 1980s, decided to pool some resources in a consortium that would go and invest that money in long-term university research that they all would share. They share the results, they share access to the faculty and the students. In the end, they actually hire the students, and then they start all over again. And it wasn't an easy thing to start, but what made it work in the end and keep working was that both of the parties, the industry side and the university side, got value out of the partnership. Not just money, but value. And I think that's a really important aspect to a successful partnership. And the other piece that was really important to that model was the involvement of passionate people. There were hundreds of science and engineering experts from the member companies who engaged with the university researchers. And so it was really an ecosystem. And SRC was just facilitating those interactions. So those are two things I think are essential to a good partnership.
Anna-Marie, do you mind if I just make a few basic remarks before I answer your question?
Absolutely, and do introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm Jeannette Wing. I'm currently the director of the Data Science Institute and professor of computer science at Columbia University. Just before I joined Columbia in July, I was corporate vice president of Microsoft Research in Redmond.
Yes.
And I also, before that, I was on the faculty at Carnegie Mellon University for decades. But I also served at the National Science Foundation for 3 years as the SCI's AD. So I have wore the government, industry, and academic hats. And I have perspectives on this ecosystem like you wouldn't believe.
Well, please share.
Before I answer the question on the table, and I would like to answer it, I would like to reinforce Jim Duderstadt's remarks this morning and add a couple of my own details. So first of all, I think that this government-university industry partnership is out of whack. And I think specifically in my field in computer science, we're facing a triple whammy. So first of all, government funding is uncertain. So this instability and the uncertainty is affecting the research enterprise on campus because we close in, we get conservative about what we're going to do, what we're going to propose, and because research dollars are presumably declining, we are busy writing grants to support our labs, to support our students, our postdocs, our equipment. And there is more competition for shrinking dollars. So this gets just worse. And this is going to affect the nature and conduct of science and engineering. The second is industry. We cannot expect industry to fill the gap. Especially when you're in industry, you have competition. You have to worry about the short term and the bottom line. That is the purpose of, a business. So unless you're a monopoly, we cannot expect industry to fill the gap of funding basic long-term research. The third whammy, and this has not been mentioned at all this morning yet, is our competition from abroad. In particular, China. In particular, in my area, computer science, and specifically artificial intelligence. So just early in October, Jack Ma, the executive chair of the Alibaba Group, announced that he is going to invest $15 billion in the next 3 years on a new research academy. To put that in perspective, NSF's annual budget is about $7.4 billion. And China has a 3-step plan to build its industry through research and development in AI so that by the time of 2030, it will be supposedly investing on the order of $150 billion in core AI and AI-related industry. And with that plan, they have basically asserted that they will be the global leader in AI. So it's not just looking inside at the US and the history of this wonderful research enterprise that we have built in the past 150 years, but it's also looking outside where our competitors are not going to sit still. They're going to perhaps leap ahead. So I think the conversation has to be broader than just our research universities. It is about investing in this country's future through investing in basic research in science and engineering. So those are my opening remarks.
I'm going to push. Okay.
And look, I didn't even read them.
I'm going to push back on you a little bit about what you said because Jack Ma probably just made $10 billion a couple of days ago during Singles Day.
Yeah, that's right.
But I'm saying that that's the perfect example. I mean, you've just said that industry can't fill the gap. Jack Ma has a bottom line, and he's investing $15 billion. Why,
Now let's ask the US industry, are they going to make the same kind of investments? And now let me put my former Microsoft research hat on. In the glory days of Microsoft research, much like in the glory days of Bell Labs, there was a from-the-top commitment to fund open, basic, long-term research and hire the best and the brightest from actually the universities. And as I witnessed this at Microsoft as competition got stiffer. The nature of, let's just put it this way, the pressure from the top to deliver to the bottom line, which is value to the company, and it's all about value, impact on the company, that was made explicit in a way it had never been in the previous 25 years of the history of Microsoft research. So, and yes, Facebook has a little AI research lab, but a lot of the research going on in these companies that are competitors, the Frightful Five, let's just call them that, they're all, it's actually some of these don't even do research, but the kind of research that the Googles and the Facebooks and the Microsofts do, a lot of it is either not open or it's more applied. It's not looking to the long term. It's not basic research. It's not, certainly not curiosity driven. I'm exaggerating a little bit because I still feel loyalty to Microsoft research.
They've been very generous.
Yes, and they have been an outlier, even in this very tough time. But I was talking about China, and Alibaba is a monopoly in China. So,
okay. So what does characterize effective relations?
So I tried to use this university, industry, government acronym, but GUI really sticks in my head. It's about first of all, the very simplistic way I like to think about it is the government provides funds for the universities to produce talent and ideas. Talent and ideas go to industry. Industry produces services and products for the good of society, for the good of the economy, for national security, for the good of the country. And that produces dollars that go back through taxes and so on, that go back to the government so that the government could continue to fund the universities. It's a nice little cycle. It's very simplistic, but I'm just following the money. That's just one example of why you need this balance in this government-university-industry partnership. I think the other, I won't speak on this because I want to let you speak. The other thing that Rush Holt mentioned was looking at regulation and policy that does obviously affect universities and industry. So,
hard act to follow, but please.
Okay. So I'm Mike McPherson. I recently retired from being the president of the Spencer Foundation in Chicago, which is, I think, the only foundation in the United States that devotes itself principally to research about education. My qualifications for being here are puzzling. I've never worked in industry. I've never actually worked at a university. Before being at Spencer, I was the president of Macalester College in St. Paul, and before that I taught at Williams College. So never at a research university, and I've never served in government. So 0 for 3. I think
that's why you're on the panel.
Right.
Well, I have a theory about why I'm on the panel.
Whole range of perspectives.
Which is that I'm the co-chair with Roger Ferguson of TIAA of a commission from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, supported by the Carnegie Corporation, on the future of undergraduate education in the United States. And for me, some of the points made earlier, I think, are very germane in thinking of the relationship among these three operations of government, university, and industry, and undergraduate education writ large. So we weren't, unlike the Lincoln Project, we weren't focused on public research universities. We were looking at everything from community colleges to the large four-year institutions and so on. And I would draw two points that I think are really germane to having a healthy partnership, and as Rush Holt was suggesting, a healthy long run for this partnership. One of them is that we have to make sure that we don't fall into thinking about college preparation in narrowly vocational terms. It's not simply about getting ready for the first job. It's not having the STEM skills that will let you become a coder. It is acquiring what have often been thought to be basic liberal arts capacities, like critical thinking, problem solving, the things that will carry you, especially in a turbulent world, through a career, not a first job. And one of my colleagues on the commission is Wes Bush, the CEO of Northrop Grumman, and he's so clear about saying, we don't really want you to do vocational training because we know how to do that better than you do. What we need you to help us with is bringing us people with these capacities. The other point that I think is so critical is we also don't want to think of people simply going to college because they're setting themselves up for careers. These are citizens in preparation, and if we are going to have the kind of public understanding of science and science's role and science's content that this nation and the world need, a lot of that has to happen in college, and not just at the research universities, and not just at the four-year colleges, but also for the 40% of people whose education is in community colleges and other training institutions. So that's my theory of why I'm here. Also, I think Facebook is a monopoly, so we can talk about that.
Okay, we've already...
That's why it's being regulated now.
We've touched on this a little bit, but what are the challenges? But then particularly not just listing the challenges, but what might we do differently to make these partnerships work better?
You want me to begin? So on the plane ride yesterday, I did my homework, and I wrote down 3 challenges that I thought I would use to start this answer and conversation. I think one of the challenges, trends and challenges, and of course challenge means opportunity, is what I call research being more multidisciplinary, multi-individual, meaning you need teams, multi-institutional, multinational, multi-sectoral, if you think of government. And when I say government, I'm including the government laboratories, and I'd like to reflect a little bit on their role as well. There was mention of the role of nonprofits and foundations, and those entities, I think, are potentially playing a growing role in certain areas. So how do universities who are discipline-oriented deal with that, or how are they dealing with that today? I think that's a trend that is going to continue and will be a challenge, in a sense, for the institutions. Jeannette referred to the different drivers for the different sectors. So if you're expecting these government, university, and industry organizations to partner, you have to, each of them has to recognize the different timeframes that the others work in. So universities, of course, are about discovery and education and fairly longer time horizons typically, and I would say they should be thinking longer time horizon. They shouldn't be job shops for industry in general. Government research labs, I'm at one now, they're mission driven. And despite the fact that Oak Ridge is largely funded by basic energy sciences, part of DOE, and does basic research, there is an energy in the middle of that, and these are very much supporting the mission of the Department of Energy. And so that sort of poses some challenges sometimes when industry and, when government labs and universities try to work together. Although I will say that Oak Ridge has over 1,000 undergraduates in a year that are coming and doing research at the laboratory, and some 300 to 400 postdocs. So there are a lot of students and early career researchers that interact with a laboratory like Oak Ridge, and we welcome those to anybody in the audience from a university. And then industry, of course, is very much focused on the bottom line and much nearer term. And we were joking over breakfast one of the companies that used to fund a lot of research in the tech industry. I had a meeting with someone there who said, yeah, we're all about research as long as it's within 90 days we get the results. So that's their kind of research, perhaps. So that's a second challenge. And the third challenge I'll just briefly touch upon is the pipeline of workers. That's a really, when I was at SRC, the most, and I would meet with people from our member companies, Intel, IBM, Texas Instruments, and others, and ask them, what do you get out of your membership in SRC? Often the first thing they would say is the students. The research results may, in fact, tell them this is a direction you shouldn't bother going most of the time, but that's fine. But the students they would hire, and they would be relevantly educated and extremely valuable employees right out of the gate. And arguably, I would say that the experience that the students had while they were at university was enhanced over not being funded by an organization like SRC because of the interactions they were able to have. I'm going to go ahead and say this. I think that STEM graduate student populations are mainly male and mainly non-US these days, and that's a problem. So I would say that's a challenge as well. So I'll just let others respond.
I'd like to remark about a couple of challenges. First of all, and again, I'll speak specifically because this is raised already this morning about industry, especially in computer science and artificial intelligence, eating our seed corn. I literally have those words in my remarks, and they were said this morning. The outrageous packages that the tech companies are offering fresh PhDs and faculty to come and work in these companies and not actually do research, but apply the AI techniques that have shown to bear astounding results in the past 5 years. These outrageous packages are, it's really a true talent war that the companies are having, let alone alluring and luring away faculty and students from academia. So that means we're not replenishing the future generations of researchers. And it's actually not just about money, just to be honest. It is also about the fact that industry has the data and has the compute that academics do not have access to in order to do the research and the applications of AI. And so in some areas in computer science and AI, industry is actually ahead of academia. This is also not good for science for the long term. So that's one huge challenge. I'd like to think that that's one of these blips in the history of science that will go away over time. We shall see. AI is not going to go away, and AI will certainly transform a lot of sectors. The other challenge I see, and now I speak to the university community, now with my government hat on, is we in the university community need to explain our research results to the public and to policymakers in language that they understand. So one of my favorite stories, if you don't mind, I will repeat my story. When I was at the National Science Foundation, that I told to all my fellow ADs and the director of NSF, everyone got it. It's the Google story. So if you let me tell you the Google story, all of you will get it. And we need those kinds of stories. So in the late 90s, the SCI's director had a digital libraries program, and it funded a project at Stanford. Hector Garcia Molina was the PI in this digital libraries initiative. And in the final report of this project, as all good NSF PIs write final reports, it's only a 4-page final report. The first page of that final report, undergraduate students supported by this project, the first name on that list, Larry Page. He was the co-founder of Google. The last page of the final report, under miscellaneous, was the sentence, and we founded a company named www.google.com. You cannot connect the dots more explicitly between NSF funding and Google, which transformed society, our economy, and created new economies. It's a story all of you can understand. Every staffer, everyone in Congress uses Google. Everyone got that. That story carried some, helped carry NSF for a while. I don't know if that story's still going around. Those are the kinds of stories that the public can understand, that policymakers can understand. Those are the kinds of stories we need. There's even further back, we can point to DARPA that helped create the DARPANet, that helped then create, with NSF support, NSFNet, that then helped create the internet. I mean, these are great, simple...
Al Gore didn't do it?
simple stories. And there are tons of others, not in computer science, in all your science and engineering disciplines, in medical science. CRISPR. Again, where did some of the CRISPR technology outcomes come from? University laboratories. So the university leaders, and we should probably leave the junior faculty alone because they're hunkering down trying to get tenure, but the university leadership can be spokespeople for the impact of research on society.
So I would, well, let me say first that when I saw that you were going to ask us what is the greatest set of challenges facing the university industry thing right now, I thought, wait, is this a trick question? But passing over the current administration,
yes, we're not going to talk
thinking
about that.
longer run and deeper challenges that are actually not unrelated, I think, to some of what we're seeing coming out of Washington. I'm going to pick up on something that both my colleagues, I think, also addressed. It seems to me that our nation, not only on the research front, but more broadly, is getting a narrower and narrower and shorter time horizon in the way we think about things. I think this is true in the way we think about improving education, which is all about what can we do right now that works right now, and let's not ask more fundamental questions that might bring deeper insights. I also, I think we've lost the sense that governments can make the bets that it generally doesn't pay for individual firms to make, partly because the results are uncertain or longer run, partly because it's not obvious how you make money off of it. So if you think in the US, I think a concrete example right now is the driverless car revolution. I think, as the New York Times indicated on Sunday, is going to have more than one component. We hear an awful lot about people building these cars. We hear less about people building the roads that will facilitate the driving of those cars. That's a network that has to be built. Just as we had to build out a network to have electricity around the country, a network to have telephones, to have cell phones. Networks aren't great ways to make money. And that's why governments tend to do things like invent the internet, because you can't figure out how is building better roads in Los Angeles with electronic sensors everywhere you drive going to make somebody rich. And I think we're losing touch with the public goods aspect and the long run aspects. And I think in the long run, that will be destructive of a healthy society and in particular of a healthy research establishment.
You've all given actually some examples of partnerships that have been working. You've all talked about some of the challenges. what do we need to be doing differently as a bureaucrat like me, that's trying to help my faculty attain funding, et cetera? What does government need to be doing differently? How can we, and what does industry need to be doing differently? Any or all of those?
Well, I'm going to just mention a very specific proposal, which I'm sure few people in this room could act on, but and I'm not the first to suggest that one of the knobs that's available to incentivize behavior is our tax system, and there is going to be presumably tax reform. Yes. And when I was at SRC, it was taken for granted. I would meet with people who would say, oh, SRC is special. The semiconductor industry is somehow special, and that model won't work in other industries. And I really studied it while I was there and tried to distill what the elements were that made it work. But assuming that it will continue, and it is right now, in effect, but all of the members are voluntary members. There's no reason that they couldn't decide at their next board meeting that this has been a great run, we're going to shut the thing down. Our shareholders would like us to do that, frankly. So how can the government incentivize this kind of activity, which supports long-term research, brings industry and universities together, partners with government agencies? SRC currently partners with NSF, with DARPA, and with NIST, and would welcome other government partnerships. So it's really a win-win-win. In the tax code, there's the R&D tax credit, which I think has been made permanent. There's many people in the audience who know more about it than I. I always felt, there are details in that. It's a complex tax credit, but I always felt like a company should get 10x credit for every dollar it spends through an organization like SRC, because it's going into such collaborations with competitors. They aren't going to capture all of the benefit for themselves. That dollar spent should not count the same as a dollar spent internally at the in-house research center, where they control it much more, people don't have to publish or aren't allowed to, and so on. So I think that's a tax knob that could be turned. Another idea I have, and I'm just throwing out these sort of concrete ideas in response to your question, is this whole, and this may be even more of a stretch, the repatriation of offshore earnings. There are many people who have thought of what those dollars could be spent on to incentivize their return. If a company could bring back some amount, they spent a very small percent on university research, it affects a relatively small number of companies. I mean, a small number of companies represent the largest share of those dollars, so there may not be an appetite for something like that that doesn't involve a broader set of players, but maybe that's the exact kind of thing you could do because the impact is fairly targeted and specific. But those are just a couple of ideas that are a little bit outside the realm of the normal conversations in these kinds of forums.
I'd like to go back to the drivers. If you start with government funding universities who produce talent and ideas, which then go to industry that produces the economic value and so on. And why are we here today, and why are we in the situation that we're in today? And I think if you look at one of the fundamental reasons why, it has to do with something else that was said this morning I want to reinforce, which is the public lack of understanding of the science, of the scientific method, of how science is about discovering new knowledge, which might actually supersede preceding results. And I also believe it's very important for the scientific community to be scrupulous in terms of scientific integrity and reproducibility and so on. But I think that I wanted to raise yet another American Academy of Arts and Sciences report that will be released in February. And it's called Public Perception of Science. And in the report, there are lots and lots of surveys that show that depending on your demographics, age, education level, political leanings, and so on, you will believe in certain things, scientific or not. Specifically, at the back of the report, they go through 3 case studies: vaccination, GMO, and climate science. And they look at the highest correlating factor, demographic factor for each of these. So for vaccination, it's correlated with age, meaning the older you are, the more you believe in vaccination. For GMOs, it's correlated with education level. And for climate change, it's correlated with political leaning. So I'm just sharing with you these results. You can look for the report in February. There are a lot of other numbers in there. We, in the university community, in government agencies, where we're in that position in industry, have a responsibility. We who are scientists and engineers have a responsibility to explain what it is we do, to demystify what research is. And so that's one thing that I think all of us can do: educate the public.
Yeah, and I would pick up on that and emphasize that to achieve that end, we need to take much more seriously the quality of teaching and learning. Certainly for the commission I co-chair in colleges and universities, which, frankly, in many cases, in far too many cases, the universities, the colleges themselves, and the faculty just want teaching to be good enough so you can leave me alone and do my work. Well, for most faculty at most places, your work is teaching undergraduates. And we need to find ways to measure performance, reward it. And this is very importantly in the sciences, not only in the sciences. And I think that it really is both the substance of scientific knowledge, but also the processes by which scientific knowledge is acquired and the groundings for why you should believe your science teachers when they tell you what we know from science. As Rush said, I mean, we are increasingly in an anything-goes world in terms of where your beliefs come from. And we can't realistically expect everybody to go and repeat Newton's experiments and, Galileo's dropping balls and all that. People take most science on authority, but the authority is not arbitrary. The authority is grounded in processes that people don't really know about. And this is an area, I believe, where the nation needs to make substantial investments at the pre-college level and in college. There are great examples, like I'm looking at Britt Kerwin in the first row here, who is a major player in a group called Tipsy Math, which is trying to fundamentally improve the learning of basic mathematics in college. And we need work like that, and we need that work then to be brought into practical use. I think it's extremely urgent matter.
I'm going to turn it over to the audience for questions, but I'm going to step out of the moderator role just for a second because no one mentioned this. But one thing that we found very effective with state government, which is, of course, different than the federal government, is if we can come to the state with a proposal and say, Microsoft or Amazon is putting in X amount of dollars, philanthropy is putting in X amount of dollars, and we, the university, are going to put in X amount of dollars, and if you can match that, we can do this. And it kind of shows that, first of all, that it's important to industry, that we have skin in the game, that it's important to donors, and that they're not doing it all. And again, that tends to work better for things like buildings than it might for research, although we've occasionally been able to do that, but at least that's a strategy that's worked for us. But, we've got a fabulous audience out there that's been, listening, very patiently, and I'm sure that you have questions, and we have someone there's mics on both sides, so please.
Cauce Society for Developmental Biology. We've been talking for a long time about education and how we can improve the level of education and how the public doesn't understand. And being in the trenches on these subjects for a long time, I must say that part of the reason is us. We put ourselves in an ivory tower, and then we think that we have to speak difficult, not the right way to say, but difficultly.
Yeah.
And so that people will respect us because we are scientists. But now we see this result. So I would like to ask the panel, how can we reverse it practically and effectively? Because many of us have been doing all kinds of things across the country. But every time we hear the same results, we hear the same things. So could you give us some suggestions?
So I'll give a concrete, I like concrete things, actionable. One of the things, and maybe universities are doing this again, let me qualify this since I'm not at a university, but NSF has this requirement about broader impacts in all of their proposals. Everybody diligently writes something down and hopefully does it, and then the project ends and they move on and they write the next proposal, another broader impact. So at each university, there are many projects going on at any given time that are intended to have a broader impact along the lines perhaps of what you're talking about. Are any universities taking those and combining them? Are they structuring activities so that they can amplify all of these small, important, useful activities? It wouldn't be a requirement that every proposal work with that part of the university or whatever it is, but it seems to me there's an opportunity there to get more value out of the broader impact requirement, which I think has been quite effective in some ways. But I'd be interested in whether that's something that universities have thought about.
Well, one thing I would say is that this applies to all scholarship and not just to the natural or any other kinds of sciences. Communicating well is a developed skill, and as is teaching well, and communicating at extraordinarily effective levels to broad audiences requires real professionalism. Nick Lemon, the former dean of the Columbia School of Journalism, who is also on our commission, likes to say that to researchers, if you want to get good at communicating your research results to broad audiences, go to journalism school. That's where they teach that. So it's a mistake, I believe, to think that most scientists are going to be good at communicating their results in non-technical ways. They're good at science. But we need to invest in those extraordinary people who are good at both, and in those who can communicate really well and reliably about science, who are not necessarily creative scientists themselves. Most of us aren't polymaths, and we need an appropriate modesty about that.
I'll just say that, at our university, we haven't been doing exactly what you've been talking about, but we have been trying, particularly the dean of our College of the Environment, working with scientists on how they can communicate, giving them feedback. I think one of the challenges with that is that I think that as a field, or often their colleagues don't particularly, it's not the same as a publication. And in fact, sometimes when people, let's say in my field, I'm a adolescent psychologist, if someone publishes an article in Family Circle, your colleagues look at you like, it's not just that you don't get credit for it, but they look at you as somehow, maybe they should take away credit that, you were able to say something in simple terms.
Maybe we should call it the Carl Sagan effect.
Yeah, but the other thing is that actually, we woefully know very little about how to communicate. My wife's a cognitive psychologist, and she's been doing research on how do people understand. You know, we all think that graphics are going to do things better. A lot of graphics make things actually more confusing, and I think that we should actually be doing research a little bit more on how do we communicate. So.
I will just add one point about this. I very much agree with what you said. Not every scientist is going to be a great communicator to the public. So maybe that's not what we should be striving for. But what we could strive for is already, and this is very concrete now, and it's going to scare all the junior faculty in the audience, but already for tenure, we credit your research portfolio, your teaching portfolio, and your service to your professional community. But we can also add under service communication to the public or broader impacts. In other words, your research, you don't have to communicate necessarily because you may not be a good communicator to the public, but the research results can be explained, or someone else like the professional team in the university can then show how this research result actually impacts society, having that broader impact. And that can be counted in your tenure review. In other words, it should be looked for.
We all know how much service counts towards
Well,
tenure.
I think it depends on the university.
I mean, let's be honest. You know, I mean, I'm not disagreeing. We're trying to push that, but with outside reviewers, et cetera, you know, service is not what's going to get you
but
there.
This is something that we as an academic community
Exactly.
can either decide, you know, we're always going to treat service as this second-class citizen, or we're going to say it's an equal of the three legs.
Yes, it's on us.
It's on us, exactly.
But then you have to measure it.
Yeah,
That's,
sure,
that's
of course,
important.
of course. And in fact, you know, we get letters of reference saying this person is a
We're pretty
great
good at measuring things.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Measuring things you care about.
Exactly.
Exactly.
First you have to care about it.
Exactly.
Then you can
Right,
measure
that's
it.
right.
Exactly. Why don't we go over here?
I'm Michael Lubell from CCNY. One comment and then one question. Comment has to do with Google. It was a partnership of Science Counts and Research America that did an in-depth survey. And one of the things that we did with that, series of focus groups, and we thought the Google story would be fabulous. Turns out it bombed. In fact, it generated so much anger. If you watch this thing, people said, my taxpayer money made these people billionaires. You have to be very, very careful you have to think about how the public interprets it. I'm not going to, that is not true, I think, for most members of Congress. But if we're talking about public, you got to worry about it.
I think that's especially true today, you know, with all the news about Google and Facebook and
well,
and
this
so
was
on.
2 years ago.
But what my story was in 2007, which was a good time for that story.
Anyway,
No, but
here's
that's
my
important.
question. We're talking about giving people skills, talking to the public. I know in my university we do a very good job of teaching science majors and graduate students how to think scientifically. We don't do that with undergraduates very much. We teach them facts. We teach them this is the science. So how do we turn this around and focus more on giving undergraduates who are not in the science programs the skills to make scientific evaluations?
There is some actually really good work on this. It's particularly at the undergraduate level. You know, notably, Carl Wyman, Nobel laureate in physics, has devoted himself for over 15 years principally to science pedagogy. And he has a great new book. I can't remember the name of it, but actually talking about demonstration projects to get people to rethink things. There is, thanks to the NSF, a lot of discipline-based education research, which can be funded through NSF grants and which is largely limited to STEM for obvious reasons. But in those disciplines, especially I think physics and biology are the leaders in this area. There has been serious study of what allows undergraduates to achieve greater levels understanding. And we all know that just like history, science is about putting the facts in the right context. You know, knowing that the Civil War happened in 1861 is a good thing, but knowing what came before, what came after, and what factors helped to lead to it, that's history. So I think the analogy holds for science, and one of the real problems is we don't have an equivalently funded outfit outside of the sciences to the NSF. So the sciences have a big head start in this area.
And I think that there is quite a bit of work on experiential learning, which helps. But even, you know, we have and Wyman's work is very much in that line. We have actually a principal lecturer. His name is Scott Freeman, and he's published in Science. And, you know, he can teach a class of 800 biology majors. He uses flipping the classroom so that, you know, they basically do the listen to the lectures on their own time. You know, the ones who take slower can go backwards and forwards. And then they use class to work in small groups on actual projects with a lot of TAs. So, you know, and his, you know, in the article in Science, it actually shows not only do students in general learn better, but it's particularly good at closing the gap between underrepresented minorities and others. So, you know, I think we are playing with new teaching techniques, but, you know, there's more work to go.
Hi, thank you for an interesting discussion. A lot of the action items proposed for, shall we say, the research enterprise is inform the public about science, increase public education, convince policyholders to fund science. Obviously, these are things that we should do. These are somewhat Sisyphean tasks. We should explore, given our environment of the economy and society, what else can we do to find sources of research funding. One area that I'd like to hear the panel's thoughts on, and for people to consider, is turning a weakness into a strength. You mentioned the tech sector, for example, poaching university professors, graduate students. At the same time, there's a lot of companies these days getting an enormous amount of investment dollars, having very high initial public offering valuations, and they have, shall we say, very questionable business models. That indicates that there's potentially a lot of money floating around in the startup investment ecosystem infrastructure, and people are kind of willing to be a little free with that. How can we channel that money that people are investing into what they've been hyped to believe is the next big thing? How can we channel that money to universities and other research centers to do the kind of long-term basic research that is being neglected? I'd like to hear the panel's thoughts on that.
Start a good company. I mean, those people are managing other people's money for the most part. Angel investors might, I guess, be a source, but people who are managing venture capital funds are, you know, making bets on behalf of a group of investors. And from what I understand, the risk tolerance in that community is going down as well. And so once again, the government is expected to pony up for the earliest stage R&D or research, let's say. Those guys have funds, and they will be ready when the idea is to a point where they can see that path, but it's got to be a path that can take, you know, 10 years or less, preferably less, and so on. You're nodding your head. So I'll let, maybe you have experience from Microsoft, how they think about this.
I think, first of all, you're absolutely right with respect to, you know, the VC community now and being even a little more conservative in terms of startups, where there is just a lot of money, and now government is expected to step in. This is just, you know, another one of those crazy things. But in terms of the big companies, the big tech companies, right now, I mean, I will speak for the kind of the IT tech sector. It's all about AI. It's very short-term thinking. It's all about deep learning. And the talent wars are crazy, and they're just poaching each other. And it's very short-term thinking. It's not about research. It's not at all about research. And what's killing me is that we don't even know why deep learning works. That's a scientific question, but the Frightful Five are running this race so fast with each other they can't even take that step back and say, what's going to happen when deep learning hits a wall? And that, in fact, is the role of academia, I believe, to be understanding the science of these machine learning techniques and what's beyond deep learning. So I don't have an answer to your question because I just don't think the tech industry sees themselves as that's their role. I'm kind of hoping that there are these philanthropists out there who believe in basic research and science and engineering, and maybe some of these people who have made their money in big tech will become philanthropists and realize that they made their money based on the shoulders of the graduate students in the academia.
Well, we're in the Kavli Auditorium, and
Right.
that's an example.
I think the pragmatic advice is keep an eye on those VCs. Wait till they get their first unicorn and then talk to them the next day. Because
Yeah,
the typical VC investment fails. Maybe 1 in 10 succeeds at some level, 1 in 100 succeeds big time. They don't feel like they have any money until they have a whole lot of money. This is not the way I wish the world worked, but in fact, you know, if you talk to people at Stanford in the humanities, they want to be friends with somebody who made it big in computer science after getting an undergraduate degree at Stanford and get them to fund their project just by writing a check. None of this grant making or any of that stuff. This is a you know, terrible thing in my view, but that's where the money is.
we've become a very impatient society.
This isn't a direct answer to your question, but I actually do think that academia can be more flexible too. I mean, we've been experimenting more with, you know, go work at Microsoft or Amazon 25% time,
Yeah.
and then work here. That 25% is giving you enough money that, you know, you can buy a house in Seattle.
Yeah, I actually want to commend UW for this because I know some of your faculty who have really good deals with other companies, not Microsoft.
Yes.
Right. And I always envied that, first of all, UW would be so open-minded.
It took a lot of work to get there.
But also that the companies would also be open-minded. I think, you know, I look
IP issues are the hardest thing.
Yes, exactly. I look at the UK, for instance. It's very common practice for faculty in the UK to continue holding on to their professorship while they're full-time employees at some company. It's prestigious for the company because this guy's got this professorship or this gal. And the universities don't get, you know, all up in a tizzy about it. So I did look to UW
We also
for that.
developed, I think that it passed their faculty senate like 3 years ago, a professor of practice, so that we could be bringing in someone from, let's say, a Microsoft research or someone working in Amazon's legal department, and they could be a professor for a couple of years. And then they bring that back to industry, the value, they create internships for students. So, you know, I think that sometimes we in universities are a little bit too rigid as well.
I agree.
You think?
Hey, what can I say?
Hello, my name is Wayne Johnson, and I'm had a number of roles. I'm currently a member of GUI, or what we call GUIR here. But my background is primarily corporate, and I've worked in 3 major corporate research labs, including Microsoft and HP. My comments are going to be based on a meeting that occurred here about 3 years ago, run by the Office of Science and Technology Policy, called Lab to Market. Some of you may have heard about it or gone to it. The focus was, if we don't find a way to get this science out of the labs, mainly university they were focused on, we're going to lose the support for this money. And I had an aha moment in that meeting where I raised my hand and I said, well, how much money is spent every year in universities by all these places? And I had never heard this number in 20 years of working in the space. And at the time, it was $64 billion. Now we're talking about Jack Ma and a few other things like that, but $64 billion a year, and what comes out the other side? And I'd like to challenge, so two things. I would like to challenge some of the basic premises that are part of our history, including Vannevar Bush, who I admire greatly, but I'm not sure what's coming out the other end is what he was expecting. And I'll cite the Stokes book on Pasteur's Quadrant as maybe a good example for how these things fit together, that I think that would be good. And the other thing is, I will tell you from my corporate experience, I think most corporations have no clue as to how to partner into this system. I could tell you that in my work, which I had the privilege of doing in that space, I could probably tell you I think there's 10 companies in the United States that have any sense of how to access that $64 billion. Not steal somebody, not hire somebody, but have a strategic triple helix innovation triangle partner. And I'd like to get your reaction to my thoughts about Pasteur's Quadrant, and also, where do you think industry really is? 64 billion, it's real money, and they have no clue. End of diatribe.
Well, I agree with you that industry generally isn't very good at working with universities, although they've gotten better. And on the other side, universities have got much better at working with industry. So maybe the gap has closed a little bit, and maybe it will continue to do so. But one of the problems that I saw when I was at SRC, or that I heard from our member companies, was our lawyers have much more important documents to review than an agreement with a university for a research project. It's just not their number one area of business. And so it's, they are thinking about these agreements the wrong way, frankly. They're thinking about them the same way they think about licensing agreements. They're business to business. And so that's again where this intermediary, some kind of a entity like an SRC, can serve that function and be the interface with the universities. SRC had a very standard agreement. There were a few things that could be negotiated. It would get put in place and it would go. And we had such long relationships with so many universities. When we came back and said, new statement of work, same agreement, it could get signed in days. And so I'm not sure every company should try to learn how to do this or that that's necessary. There may be other solutions because it's just never going to be the business of business to do research partnerships with universities, frankly, even if it's in their best interest.
I think SRC is almost unique in terms of a successful university-industry relationship. And so I'd like to ask you, how come it is so successful? What is it? Is it about because it's semiconductors or hardware and companies can't do it all? Or what? Why is SRC a success?
Well, maybe we should.
There have been other attempts at this. So why is SRC a success?
I would say that the sort of main reasons why it is successful are that it started through the commitment of key individuals. So Robert Noyce, who was a founder of Intel, and Eric Bloch at IBM, who became director at NSF and was, IBM research director, and others were passionate individuals. And frankly, I think if it didn't exist today, it wouldn't be created. I don't think the same, ability at the leadership level exists today, even in that industry. Number two is that the intellectual property environment in the semiconductor industry is such that they can share IP because all of their products have so much differentiating intellectual property that the companies bring to the table. It's okay if they happen to share some, whereas in the pharmaceutical industry, for instance, that's not the case. There's no such thing as pre-competitive or non-competitive research. Whereas the semiconductor industry could come together and say, what are topics that we all agree we all need? And the cost of doing it ourselves individually is going up and up and up, and so it really makes business sense, right? It all comes down to business. And the third, and sometimes the short answer I would get to this question, or give to this question, is Moore's Law. So Moore's Law was a business driver. It sounds like a law of physics, but of course it really was a law of business, that they were committed as companies to maintaining this trend. And so they all did have shared needs in order to do that. And I don't know of other industries where they have that kind of a shared cadence and driver on the business side that drives the technology, and the sort of voracious need that presented for new science and engineering. The only way to kind of get that was through universities. And what's happening now that Moore's Law is coming to an end is very interesting. It's going to be interesting times for SRC. Will they continue to have a committed group of companies that have a shared vision for what they all need and can benefit from? We'll see.
So just a quick word on Pasteur's quadrant. That's a very real thing. And if you look at, for example, Joel Mokyr, who's a historian, economic historian at Northwestern, has written about the history of innovation. And there are clearly many cases of engineering leading to possibilities that then allow basic understandings to improve. But there is also, call it Newton's quadrant, which is the quadrant of much more of pure thought, the kind of Einstein or Newton saying something doesn't fit, and holding that idea in your mind long enough to gain an understanding. And there's Edison's quadrant, which is, a ton of practical innovation without a lot of really breakthrough ideas. And then there's my quadrant, which is neither creative nor practical. So, it takes at least 3 quadrants to make a thriving, long-run scientific enterprise.
I mean, I do wonder that, when a question like that is asked, if sometimes we get very caught up in talking about the sexy results of science, cures for diseases, et cetera, and don't sometimes talk as much about the fact that because, industry needs roads, industry needs bridges,
Absolutely.
Buildings that don't fall down during earthquakes, all the kind of mundane things that we take for granted that allow us to go about the business of business that actually science engineering has played a big role in. And that, maybe, I just wonder if maybe we need to talk a little bit more about the basics, which are so important and that did come out of work that our folks were doing, and not just focus as much on kind of the sexy stuff, which is a lot more fun to talk about. I don't know, it's just a thought. Yeah.
Hi, Jeff Sitch from George Washington University. Previous lifetime, I spent 6.5 years doing corporate and foundation relations in St. Louis, so learned a little bit about the biotechnology industry and the impact that technology and industry has on a community. And other thing industry really needs is the next generation. And I'm just curious, we're talking a lot about the lack of good science education, but with the YouGov poll that came out last year that showed that people under 30 in this country, it was like 43% favor a socialistic type of society, as opposed to, I think it was about 12% lower for our free enterprise system. So I just think that might have some real concerns for industry and this whole partnership going forward.
Or question?
Well, is there, how is that going to, what is industry doing? Is there any thought given to this type of climate?
I would have polled the same way when I was in my 20s. Yeah. I think that's partly youth.
Well, it's Democrats too poll that way too. It's sort of, it's interesting. But, okay.
No, does anyone have any?
I don't feel qualified.
I don't think probably 43% of industrialists would have the same view about socialism, but socialism can mean so many different things. I think the United States economy would thrive better with a more robust welfare state, health care for all, some of those things, which some people would call socialism. I think the invention of the kind of democratic socialism that exists in some Northern European countries has much to recommend it, and it's perfectly legitimate to have large-scale economic debate, only would it were informed about these kinds of alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, I think socialism in theory is incredibly attractive. And at that age, many people are operating in the world of theory. But I also think that there is, we've seen over the last decade or so an amazing increase in inequality. And that, often that's attributed to rapacious industry. I don't view it that way, but I think that, until we start dealing a bit more with inequality, there is going to be that tendency of seeing it, I get it all the time, the corporatization of the university, when we partner and, I try and explain that, hey, we very much scrutinize those partnerships that we're under, and we've walked away from some. But, I do think that you've got your finger on a pulse that's real, and that we do need to, and I think it's both on universities educating, but also on businesses and corporations being clearer about the social good that can come out of them as well.
Good morning, I'm Rena Kachonis with Northern Illinois University. I just want to kind of affirm the need for and the value of public engagement. I see many people in the room here who just spent the last 3 days at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities annual meeting, and I can tell you that most of the sessions we're talking about engagement in some form. And I just want to encourage university-based researchers to reach out to the people who are already within their universities, and that is engagement and outreach professionals. They are very skilled at engaging with students, with faculty, with industry. They're looking at issues of innovation, competitiveness, economic prosperity. So as scientists are thinking about how to translate their work, how to identify needs in society, needs in their regions, in the communities, really in the whole world, there are people on campus who can help them translate those needs, who can help them measure their impact, their outcomes, assess what they're doing, find partners, create shared vision and values. So there are engagement and outreach professionals in most universities, and let's find a way to better link and leverage the assets that we already have within our universities to do a better job of working with industry and creating value for our communities.
I would certainly endorse that. I think that a lot of regions want to be the next Silicon Valley. You certainly have, you hear those wishes expressed. But there certainly is a recognition that the availability of capital is not even around the country. And yet, I would imagine that every community that is home to a big university would love to capture some of the benefits and value of the research that's going on in that university. So to your point, the university researchers and others on campus should look outside the gate and find those individuals in the community who want to help make that happen. I think there's a real hunger in the communities for that. And so, having an open mind, and to your point, the university, and I wrote this down as one of the things that what can universities do. I imagine that universities could give people more time. That's the most precious resource in a way, the faculty, to go and do those kinds of things, so that maybe they don't have to teach a class, or maybe there's some ways of recognizing time spent doing those kinds of activities.
Good morning. I'm William Swift. I'm the head of PBS NewsHour's STEM and Health Student Reporting Labs. So I just wanted to give you a little ray of sunshine. PBS, as far as I can tell, through this budget, is funded by the government. We are creating a network of high schools and middle schools that are working with a curriculum we've developed. We have over 120 schools across the U.S. I'm in charge of the STEM and health, which are supported by NSF and NIH grants, to help teach kids how to create a quality news story about anything involving STEM, involving health, and you'd just be amazed at how enthused these students are to be getting these tools and be able to work with those around them. One of the most empowering things is the idea that they have to pick up a phone and call their local research institutions to find out what types of research are being done, what types of stories are there for them to help tell. So there are people working to develop the next generation of communicators, news tellers, and people with an understanding of what it takes to create a quality story about science, about health, and this is thanks to the NSF and the NIH. My one question for the panel is the idea that, is there something we can do about the publish or perish mentality in our universities and higher learning institutions? The problem with publish or perish, I believe we've touched on, is professors get more focused on their work than on their students' work. That graduate students are being exploited for their ideas and information and being used by their professors to advance their career because they can publish those results and their name is first on the paper. How can we create a system that is going to be supportive of the professors and their need for tenure, as well as their students who need their focus?
Well, first of all, I want to comment on your program, which sounds like a wonderful one, and I think that the people that the students contact will learn as much as your students do from what you're doing.
I fully agree.
And to your other question, I'll defer to my university colleagues here, but I think, we don't have national universities in this country, really, and so there's differences at every institution, and it has to come from the top, in my opinion. Oak Ridge is actually going through a metrics exercise to figure out what are the appropriate metrics for researchers at an institution like a national laboratory, some of whom don't publish, for example, at all. So I think these exercises are happening in universities as well, and hopefully with support from the top, there will be some changes, but I don't know if they're coming.
Well, I think actually NSF is doing, I think the issue, at least from my perspective, isn't so much publish or perish, it's publish, 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 or perish. And that, the whole kind of, that the more numbers you get, the better it is. And, and you have people, looking at studies and finding what I call the least publishable unit. How can you, take this study and, break it down into 6 publications instead of 4? And I think NSF is doing actually a nice job in that now, rather than listing all your publications, it's like list your 5 best. And so, in other words, less of a focus on numbers than on quality. And I think we're seeing, in some departments more than others, but that translating into tenure reviews, focusing on, you get outside reviewers and you tell someone, you can send them 5 articles instead of sending them everything. So I think we're moving in that direction, but quite frankly, I think we need to move more quickly. Because I think if it's more on quality, that does leave more room to not spend all the time on busy work of just getting stuff out, and also leaves more room to work together with students and worry less about just the getting out.
Yeah, I want to add to this because I think there are, in some fields, and I will speak again for computer science, but perhaps science and engineering more broadly, but certainly computer science, people are recognizing it's even worse than what you describe, publish or perish. In computer science, most of the breakthroughs are published in conference proceedings, let alone journals. And so now imagine, double column, 12-page research results packaged into these little nuggets, and the more of those, the better. It's like crazy. And in fact, I wrote a blog entry a few years ago about how we need to stop this deadline-driven research that conferences have, caused the change in the computer science culture. First of all, so the good news is that there are some universities and some departments in those universities that look in the tenure review case at impact, not quantity, and have very meaningful, thoughtful conversations about what is the impact of this person's research, and not look at numbers of papers, journal, or conference. That's what we need to start with. And so the fact that NSF is saying, or actually I get now a request for tenure letters, and they only send me maybe 3 papers. Or if they don't send me any papers, I say, just give me the top 3. I don't want to read 5. So So we can slowly change a culture. I completely agree with Anna Marie. It has to come from the top, and it has to be a collective change through the academic system, because we all work together.
This has been so much fun. We've gone a little over time. So let's thank our panelists who've done such a fabulous job. And thank you for what you're doing. Let's end on a positive note. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna Maria, Celia, Jeannette, Michael. Really appreciate it. Very illuminating panel and very good comments from the audience. So congratulate all of you. We're now